Hello, good morning, everyone. Sige. So, in our very first meeting, we talked about the nature of philosophy, right? So, just a brief summary. We started with the meaning, and then definition of philosophy provided for by Father Manuel Piñon in his book Fundamental Logic. And he started with the etymological definition, right, of philosophy as love of wisdom. Philos, love, and then Sophia is wisdom. It was coined by Pythagoras, who in was born in 584 BC, who was asked whether he was wise. No, he was one of the Sophos, wise men, but he responded modestly that no, he's not claiming to be wise. He's just a lover of wisdom. That's why the philos part there. It's just a lover of wisdom, claiming to be wise, which is way different because when you do philosophy, you do not claim to know everything. In fact, you do not claim to know the answers. You just wonder at the questions that are facing humanity. So that's the first definition we tackled, philosophy, etymological definition of philosophy as love of wisdom. Then we proceeded with a more formal definition, a substantial or substantive definition provided for by Aristotle and borrowed by the Thomistic tradition by the scholars of Aquinas. And it's of philosophy as the science of things by the ultimate principles and causes as known by natural reason alone. We emphasized how philosophy is a science and therefore it's not just the domain of opinions and theories, but it's about principles. Now, we're tackling here philosophical principles which are not dependent on subjective opinion. No? Instead, for example, just because you disagree with the law of causality doesn't mean you can float. No, just because you disagree with the law of gravity doesn't mean you can float because you disagree with it. No, it still applies to you objectively, whether you believe in it or not. The same way, philosophical principles, no, like especially logical principles like the law of non-contradiction, even if you do not believe in these principles, you will still be bound by them. So philosophy is a science, in the sense that it does not just study opinions, it studies principles, universal principles. And then it tackles things. What types of things? Everything. Nothing is exempted from philosophy. For example, if we go to the definition of philosophy by Wilfrid Sellars, Wilfrid Sellars says philosophy is the study of how everything hangs together in the broader sense of the term, and that everything there is in the broader sense of the term. So nothing is exempted. Real, concrete things like tables, chairs, even imaginary things, we call them imaginary entities. Like, for example, unicorns, no, bakunawa, anything. No, these are all part of are part of the set of things to be studied in philosophy. Now, in what aspect of these things we study them in their ultimate causes and principles? So we're not satisfied with the surface level. Mangita ta kung sa manjoy principles necessary for any change, for example, to occur at all. We see that something changes. For example, we see that the table, no, we see that a cup of coffee changes from being hot to being cold, diba? There's a change there, but what are the necessary conditions under which such change can occur? One of the conditions, for example, is that is necessity for there to be a real possibility or potency within the cup to change from hot to cold, right? So we know that because of philosophy. We do not know that because of biology. We don't know that because of physics, chemistry. No, because we go beyond all these physical sciences and look for the principles, metaphysical principles, under which these that underlie all these physical principles. And then we're using the natural light of human reason, which means divine revelation, like scriptures, the Bible, Quran, they're not treated as self-evidently correct philosophy. Instead, we use the natural light of human reason. So, gamitin ang utok instead of just appealing to some authority, even if that authority is, for example, a teacher, even if that authority is a scholar, even if that authority is a priest. For example, this brings me to Immanuel Kant, who in his essay, What is Enlightenment, argues that what's ang enlightenment? Kant says, enlightenment is man's freedom from his self-incurred tutelage. Tutelage meaning pagpa-under, no, from another. And self-incurred is this tutelage when nag-agad ka sa giingon sa uban, not because di ka bright, but simply because tapulan ka to think on your own. And that's the opposite, no, of the spirit of philosophy, which is enlightenment. We're using our natural light of human reason. We, do not take anything for granted. It's the natural light of human reason. So let's go back. Philosophy is what? It's the science of things by the ultimate principles and causes as known by natural reason. Right, that's clear now. And the method of philosophy is that we use experience, but it's not empirical in the sense of the social sciences, for example, that you have to do interviews, you have to do questionnaires to answer a philosophical question. No, that's not how you do it. Instead, you reflect on experience. You use your reason to reflect on experience. Now, we talked about as well the branches of philosophy. We had three we discussed last time. Ontology, we talked about epistemology and axiology. Ontology referring to the study of being. Epistemology meaning the study of knowledge, and axiology meaning the study of value. And we talked about two types of value. We talked about how there is aesthetic value, and we talked about how there is ethical value or moral value. And it's in this moral value where ethics belongs. Right. Because we already tackled this in the first meeting on site on ang Harangian through. Now, what we were not able to tackle is that philosophy can be approached or arrived, studied in two ways. The approach of philosophy where we focus on a specific discipline like ontology, epistemology, axiology, we call that the systematic approach to philosophy, where we study a specific area or angle or aspect of reality, and we devote all our time on that angle. Knowledge for epistemology, being for metaphysics, and value for axiology. But another approach in philosophy is to do the historical or chronological approach, where we study philosophy in the four major periods. Of course, these are not exact, there are no exact boundaries between them, but roughly, when we speak of the periods of philosophy, we have the big eras, no? Ancient, medieval, modern, and contemporary / postmodern. We speak of the ancient period that refers to the father of philosophy, Thales, Anaximander, Anaximenes, and all the pre-Socratics, everybody before Socrates in Greece. Then Socrates, of course, the three of them, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, call them the triumvirate. And then some of the few thinkers after them. Then the Roman Empire, which succeeded the Greek Empire, fell. The western half of the Roman Empire fell. And that led to the medieval period. The medieval period, we have a lot of thinkers as well. The first usually is usually St. Augustine, who wrote, for example, the Confessions. We also talk about St. Anselm of Canterbury, who argued that we can know that God exists using the very definition of a perfect being, because if, according to Anselm, if God by definition is that which no creature can be conceived, then he must exist, because or else it will be the concept of God will be an analytic contradiction. So this medieval, here we find that from the ancient period, which focuses on the cosmos, the world, trying to explain what the world is like, what are the causes and origins of the world. In the ancient period, in the medieval period, we're proceeding to God, as the answer to the question of the origins of the world, of man, and so on. So that's what we see in Augustine. Augustine said, for example, our hearts are restless until they rest in God, right? Or Anselm, he proved that God exists. Or Aquinas, who had 5 ways, Quinqueviae, who tried to prove the existence of God, not from the definition of God, but from the reflection on the world. For example, some things change, therefore there must be a first changer, no, in that set of the set of changes in the world. So by that logic, we know that God exists in Aquinas. Now, daghan na sila sa medieval period. But the third one is the modern period, which of course was ushered in by, for example, the Enlightenment. For that, Descartes, for example, asked the question, if you can doubt everything, unsa may mabilin, if you doubt your senses, if you doubt even your memory, what remains yet you're sure to exist? And one thing is sure that exists is that the I exists. That's why he said, cogito ergo sum, diba? I think therefore I am. And that guarantees that at least one thing is knowable to be certainly true or real. It's that the I, the cogito exists. Now, daghan pang ni follow na, for example, David Hume questioned the possibility, the very existence of the self, who said that the idea of a causal relation between cause and effect, that's a fiction of the mind, it's a habit of the mind only, it's not a real relation in the world. Later on, Immanuel Kant, no, in his Critique of Pure Reason, who made us really rethink the nature of causality, not as an objective feature of the world, but as a category of the understanding. Then Hegel, daghan pa na sila. All of those are modern thinkers. Now, finally, in the contemporary period, no, kanusama na siya primarily at the outset of the Second World War, when we, unlike the modern period, daas kitang salig sa reason, such that we dethroned God as the foundation of everything, you know. Nahimong man na siya in modern period because cogito is the I, it's the self, which now is the center of all philosophical, all inquiry, even scientific inquiry. That's the modern period. But in the contemporary period, mura tag the disillusion. Because, for example, if man is really that rational, no, bright kayo ang tao kunuhay, and maayo kayo sa tao ang tanan on his own without God. That's the assertion of the modern period. Sapere aude, dare to know. Nganong pinatiyanay man ta, no, during the Second World War? Nganong, is that really rational? Is that really no, an indicator that man can do it on his own without the guidance of a divine being? The contemporary thinkers tend to say, perhaps not. Perhaps we're not rational. We think that we're rational, but we actually are not. We are selfish beings. We are beings who, yeah, sadly, are self-contained. No? We're not that rational. So, daghan na, no? But that's the contemporary kinataasan na sa discussion. That's the second approach. The first one, again, is the systematic approach to studying philosophy, which is itong mga branches. And then the second approach is the chronological historical period, which studies the different eras, ancient, medieval, modern, postmodern. All right. So with that in mind, with that stage setting in mind of the nature, definition, and the approaches to study philosophy, let's now proceed with the value. Why study philosophy at all? I know you're not philosophy majors. O ba ninyo, public administration? Ba ninyo, eduk majors? Right? I also had students nga computer engineering students. They are mga architecture students. Why study ethics at all? So, to help you think about that question, I'll bring you to a text by Bertrand Russell in his work, The Problems of Philosophy, particularly in chapter 15. And I enjoyed really reading this book. This was suggested to me by Sir Mijares. So, magbasahon. I'm sure you have seen that this is already posted in Google Classroom. Let's read. Ingon si Bertrand Russell. Having now come to the end of our brief and very incomplete review of the problems of philosophy, it will be well considered in conclusion what is the value of philosophy and why it ought to be studied. Okay, na. Nga daw, magtuon man sa philosophy in the first place. Wa ba nagago-hago ra? It's very impractical, right? Because di man ka madato when you study philosophy. So why do it at all? Ingon siya. It is the more necessary to consider this question in view of the fact that many men, under the influence of science, or of practical affairs, katong mga science leaning, mga physicist, mga chemist, and so on. And katong mga ganahan akong practical, ganahan need nga madato, like example, mga economist, accountant, both of these people critique philosophy for being unscientific or for being impractical. Right? About niya, pagpabajod, impossible pa jud mo arrive at conclusions ani nga field. Right? So, why bother? Nganong bahago-hago man ta? Nganong maglibog-libog man ta in the first place? Now, Russell brings us to um, his diagnosis. Nganong ngana man nilang thinking sa philosophy. First, ingon siya, nakuno sila wrong conception of the ends of life. Meaning, sayop ilang tanaw sa unsa man joy tumong sa kinabuhi. Right? That's one thing. Ikaduha, napot sila sayop nga conception sa unsa jud pod ang tumong sa philosophy. So, duha ilang sayop. On the one hand, sa tumong sa kinabuhi, ikaduha, sa tumong sa philosophy. Number one, ingon si Russell, balik ta sa tumong sa human life. Um, ingon siya, ang physical science ko no, klaro kaayo nga daghan na kaayo og nahatag sa mankind in general, right? For example, medicine. Of course, because of medicine, daghan na ayo nga mga naisakit, right? So, usually we do not ask whether medicine is important. It's self-explanatory because we see its results, right? So, so Russell acknowledges that we cannot use generic no answer or a big picture answer like it is useful to mankind. No, the value of philosophy, according to Russell, before he explains the first two, the value of philosophy is in the individual who studies it. In you, nga katuon ani. Not in the abstract humanity, but in you, nga katuon ani. So, nakuno diha, its effect on you, no? The lover of Islam. Okay. Tumpay niya. But further, if you're not to fail in our endeavor to determine the value of philosophy, we must free our minds from the prejudices of what are wrongly called the practical men. Okay, mo ni siya, mo ni, katong ganina. Unsa man tumong sa kinabuhi. Ang tubag sa mga practical men, importante kay, we have material needs, di ba? Nga makakaunta, no? Natay buy, nga, gunay utang, makabayad ta. Right? The practical man is one who recognizes only material needs, who realizes that man must have food for the body, but oblivious of the necessity of providing food for the mind. Way paki nga kanang sakto ba iyang gipang tuuhan, no? Sakto ba iyang mga prinsipyo? If all men were well off, mali problema, no? Bisan pag dato kuno tanang tao, kompleto ta og material goods. If poverty and disease had been reduced to the lowest possible point, there would still remain much to be done to produce a valuable society. Dili enough na siya, no? According to Bertrand Russell. Unsa man di kulang, even in the existing world of the goods of the mind are at least as important as the goods of the body. So, atong scenario that, let's say, dato na tanan, di pa na enough ng society. Napay kulang, ana. Unsa may kulang? Ang goods of the mind, bisan pag well-fed ka, pero imong utok way sod, wala kay wisdom. No? Will you live uh, meaningful life? No, mura na kag baboy nga tambok lagi pero you're trapped. Ingin gani si remember si ganito John Stuart Mill, ingin siya, it is better to be a human being dissatisfied than be a pig satisfied. May pa kuno itaw ka because you're capable of wisdom. Bisag gigutom ka kaysa baboy ka nga busog lagi ka. But you're not capable of the higher cognitive um, operations. So, it is exclusively among the goods of the mind that the value of philosophy is to be found. And only those who are not indifferent to these goods can be persuaded that the study of philosophy is not a waste of time. So, if imuhang mindset daan, material goods are useful in life, then of course you are blind to the value of philosophy. You do not see the value of it. Because, as I said, na naman kay bias daan. No? It's only the material world which matters to you. philosophical contemplation, therefore, does not appear as a valuable enterprise. You can see philosophy primarily aims at knowledge. What type of knowledge? Knowledge which gives unity and system to the body of the sciences and the kind which results from a critical examination of the grounds of our convictions, prejudices, and beliefs. So, on the one hand, ganahan siya mo tanaw sa whole. We have different fields. We have different claims to knowledge na igipang batbat sa radio, no? Na makita sa TV, sa Facebook, and so on. We also have lahi po nang gitudlo sa mga pari, lahi po nang gitudlo sa eskwelahan, no? Sa universities, lahi ang gipang batbat sa mga politiko, right? So, how do you make sense of how everything hangs together? The language of Wilfrid Sellers. Philosophy tries to grapple with that. No? Not only that, what's really the grounds, some of the grounds by which we evaluate if a statement is true or not? For example, logic is part of that. Political philosophy is part of it. So what is it? Grounds. Grounds atong prejudices and beliefs. Russell says, but it cannot be maintained that philosophy has had any very great measure of success in its attempts to provide answers to its questions. Gidawat ni Russell that wala joy na resolve nga problema sa philosophy because kung naay mga tubag nga ihatag ang mga philosopher na napoy mo kontra. No? But it's okay. No, dawat na nato because ingon po like third definitions of philosophy stated to me by Dr. Porino, who argues that I think it was Karl Jaspers. Yeah, it was Karl Jaspers who said that philosophy is the field where questions are more important than answers. Because the answers can be tested paghapon. It will become just a starting point for another question. But the very possibility that you can raise a new angle through a new question, that's the value of philosophy, right? Because it does not trap you in just one way of looking at the world. Daghan pang other possible ways of looking at the world. So, mana siya, dawat na to, no nga, walay tubag nga settled. But, naayo sang part na ng rason. Nganong yun, ana na siya. Because, ingon po si Russell, kung naa na po'y ma-sure nga tubag, nga rare unta na siya, nga sure nga tubag, for example, in philosophy. Kung nanay sure nga tubag, sud sa philosophy, ang mahitabo ana kay mahimo man siyang siak, no? Mahimo siyang separate branch. Kung nanay sure nga tubag, for example, sa dihang wala pa tay klarong understanding of the sky, kanang study of the stars, that still belong to philosophy, but sa dihang kasabot ito sa dagan sa stars, na himo na siyang independent nga field from philosophy. It all now became astronomy, right? Or, for example, when we study the human mind, sa una, part man philosophy. Sa dihang nanatay, murag methods nga kaugalingon, na himo na siyang established as an independent field, nawa na sa philosophy, na himo na siyang psychology. Right? But all these other fields, which already begin from a starting point of facts, and principles that are treated as certain. Before that, they were all part of philosophy. But that's only part of it, no? Nganong wala tay sure nga yan tubag, like uncertain in philosophy. Another reason is that this would give questions. No? This would give questions nga atong gitakol. But that doesn't mean that just because these questions are difficult to answer, then de facto, they're not significant to raise at all in the first place. Right? Because may problema kung ang usa ka tao ma-concern lang alone sa questions na sure says tubag. Have you seen a person who is sure sa tanang butang? No? Walay question at all kung sakto ba yung ginahuna. Nasa tubag sa tanang pangutana. That person is not capable of curiosity and wonder, right? Because he's very self-contained. Sure na siya tanan. As long as he given answers, ready-made answers. And we're avoiding that because it's a trap. No? You're incapable of experiencing wonder. So, masin, kung nagkuhan sa recent conference sa HMS. So, however slight may be the hope of discovering an answer, it is part of the business of philosophy to continue the consideration of such questions to make us aware of their importance, to examine all the approaches to them, and keep alive the speculative interest in the universe, which is apt to be killed by confining ourselves to definitely ascertainable knowledge. So, pasabot lang na is, wala. it's a trap to believe that only questions that have certain answers deserve to be asked at all. So sometimes it's important to attempt to think about these difficult questions because they open up an entire world to you. You can read the entire one. You can read this on your own, Mapol. Muna ko paspas. Pero kabasara mo ani. Then later on, he proceeds with kini, dira. Sumpay adto, let's skip a few sentences, no? You can say, the man who has no tincture of philosophy goes through life imprisoned in the prejudices derived from common sense, from the habitual beliefs of his age or his nation, and from the convictions which have grown up in his mind without the cooperation and consent of his deliberate reason. So, the person who has not raised these questions, these deep questions about whether he exists at all, whether sakto ba ang iyang religion, sakto ba ang mga gituuhan niyang political stances, tungod kay mo na yung naandan, mo iyang na-follow sa iyang family, mo na-follow sa iyang, sa iyang social group, or mao lang po yung first nga na-expose siya sa Facebook or what, convince siya. If you do not step back and ask these questions, you are living through your entire life imprisoned in the prejudices derived from common sense. So you need to step back. Why? To enlarge your thoughts and to free them from the tyranny of custom. Or makabuhi ka bitaw sa trap nga mao ni imong gituuhan tungod kay diha la pud ka na timingan nga mao ni ang influences nga naani mo. You need to step back and try to objectively assess, is this really true? So, for example, that's the heart of the scientific method according to Francis Bacon, that you break free from the idols of the tribe. Now, other than that, no, bisan pa o tinuod nga uncertain no ang answers given by philosophy. Napot some greatness to it as a discipline because of the greatness of its objects of study. Unsa man ang examples sa objects of study? For example, the existence of God. No? That's a heavy question. It's among the highest questions that man can possibly raise, right? And dili man na i-ask a question by other disciplines. It's only philosophy that raises this question. Theology does not ask the question of God's existence. Theology assumes that God's existence is a given. But philosophy problematizes the very possibility of such a being. And because of that, nasa greatness in a sense, because it tackles these difficult questions head on. It does not cower from the difficulty of these questions, and murag sa ka-sensitive niya, we dare to ask in the language of Kant. Now, if you live an unphilosophical life, you just are concerned with unsay mga latest chismis diha, di ba? Latest chismis in your circle, sa inyong even sa politikas Pilipinas and so on. Chismis ra ang concern, or if not chismis, then anything private like your enjoyment with a certain mobile game and so on, or anything. Imo hara. It's just a private interest. It's a trap actually, because you live your entire life just on your own. No, it's like a prison. It's like a garrison. Nga murag ingon bitaw si C.S. Lewis, hell is like a prison that is trapped from the inside. Ingon ana ang life nga walay kanang philosophical contemplation, murag gilakti mo ko galingon from the inside, wa kaning gawas, simply because you're not accustomed to raising these questions. So, how do you escape that trap? No nga, murag kag na consume lang sa imong personal desires. The problem there is, for example, Robert Spitzer, Spitz Priest, argues that if you're not accustomed to these higher questions, then you'll only always be looking for more and more of what gives you sensual pleasure, for example, or kanang dopamine hits. Through, for example, Malagi na makabawas no, sa imong mga kontra. So there's a big problem there. Ingan si Ja, philosophic contemplation does not, in its widest survey, divide the universe into two hostile camps. Na friend, na foe, na helpful, na hostile, na good, bad. No, we try to see the world impartially. Kung say ending point na tanan. This impartiality, no, in our attempt to solve, if not solve, then at least attempt to answer these questions. This impartiality translates into our lives. How? Um, when you are trained, no, to be impartial in terms of philosophical questions, that impartiality radiates or is translated into impartiality in your action and impartiality in your emotions. So, kung impartial kasi yung actions, that leads to the value of justice, right? So, this cognitive impartiality can, if cultivated properly, translate into impartiality in action, which is justice, right? Because you do not favor somebody just because amigo mo. You do not favor somebody because simply because he's a family member. But impartiality that translates into your dealings with others, in your actions, and also in your emotions, leading to universal love. You don't just love a specific set of people. You equally love everybody, such that you become a citizen of the universe. And by becoming a citizen of the universe, you escape the trap, as I said earlier, of just being just in a private sphere. You just enjoy your own set of things that when you die, mawa man na tanan. But at least if you're a citizen of the universe, you belong to something bigger than yourself. And your life gains meaning because when nakay personal defeats, you do not break down totally because at least there's a bigger world out there that bisan pag unsa pag crumbles in personal efforts, it still survives. It outlives you. Right? So Russell ends here. Philosophy is to be studied not for the sake of any definite answers, since no definite answers can as a rule be known to be true, but rather for the sake of the questions themselves. Because the questions enlarge our conception of what is possible, enrich our intellectual imagination, and diminish the dogmatic assurance which closes the mind against speculation. But above all, through the greatness of the universe which philosophy contemplates, the mind also is rendered great. From the greatness of the objects it studies, like the universe, the mind is also rendered great. We borrow from the greatness of the universe instead of the universe being forced to fit inside our conceptions, right? And the mind becomes capable of that union with the universe. Mono to siya, translation of this impartiality to action and emotion. Becomes capable of that union with the universe, which constitutes its highest good. Now, I'm sure if paspas mo to naman, no? So you cannot perhaps digest everything, no, just from this discussion. So this is true to all philosophical texts. You must revisit the text again and again. Balik-balikon gina siya because some insights do not hit you or strike you the first time that you encounter the idea. So it takes some time. No? For example, Dr. James Madden, who has been teaching philosophy of mind for a long period of time na, or even Plato. Every year, sige balik basa ni Plato. Bisan pag pilang dekada na siya basa ni Plato, each time that he reads it again, na ay something new nga what did na discover before. What na nabantayan before. Uncanny day, right? So, yeah, that's okay. Thank you so much, and I'll be giving you an exercise in this respect.